Hey there, folks. I've heard some of you aren't fans of the part-style narration, and I agree that the suspense is best enjoyed in one go. So, I've combined Part 1 and Part 2 with Part 3 into one seamless experience for you. If you've already listened to the previous parts, the starting point for Part 3, the timestamp can be found in the comments and description below. This series doesn't end here. We've got a total of 6 parts coming your way, so make sure to stay tuned by subscribing. And if you enjoy my content, remember to like the video and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Without further delay, let's begin. Have you seen those stupid little TikTok trends that have been going around lately? You know? The ones where on a person's 18th birthday they can choose between 2 different abilities, and the choices are some stupid shit, like being able to see how much money a person has in their bank account, or being able to see if someone is your soulmate or not. Well, guess what? I'm the poor sap that has to live with one of those abilities in real life. I can see how old a person is by the shiny white numbers that float above their head. It's not glamorous or cool. Okay, I take that back. I'm a blast when I go to the county fair and hit up the Guess My Age stall. I'm being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. My ability is pretty much useless and downright annoying sometimes. I mean, how's a guy supposed to save the world just by knowing how old somebody is? What I'm getting at is, being able to see people's ages is more of a nuisance than a superpower. The numbers are pretty blinding, and my attention always gravitates to right above a person's head, even if I'm not trying to. Now imagine how that looks to the pretty girl you're talking to, and all they can see is you staring just slightly behind them. I've gotten one too many slaps in the face for doing that. I wasn't always a freak, though. There was a period in my life when I was a normal kid with a regular childhood. The seeing people's ages thing happened after the near-death experience I had when I was 10 years old. Thankfully, nothing too traumatic happened. I just got stung by a bee and almost drowned in a pool. It was the end of summer, and my parents were hosting their annual back-to-school BBQ. Everyone had just gone inside to escape the sweltering summer heat and eat some good food, as good as my salt-is-spicy white parents could whip up, that is. I stayed outside to play by myself a bit since I was the only kid there. It was always my parents' friends, and a few extended family members who went to those parties. None of my friends. The party was mostly for my parents who were just celebrating having made it through another summer with me. It's not like I was a bad kid or anything, though. Or maybe I was, and I'm just remembering things differently, otherwise maybe I wouldn't have almost died. I was 10, so my parents didn't worry too much about me playing out in the backyard by myself. After all, at that age I was supposed to be a big boy. Anyway, I was out by the pool playing with some random toy when a bee suddenly landed on my hand. The thing you should know about me is that I'm deathly allergic to bees. Like carrying around an EpiPen in my pocket at all times, allergic to bees. I froze when I saw it, too scared to do anything. The bee must have been in a bad mood that day because it decided I was a threat and stung me, even though I hadn't done anything. I swatted the thing off my hand as a hot, searing pain started to radiate through my skin. I stood up after, freaking the hell out, as I could feel my skin puff up and the sensation of my throat slowly starting to close. In my panic, I hadn't been paying too much attention to my surroundings. One misstep later, and I plummeted into the deep end of our in-ground pool. At least the water was refreshing enough to cool the heat flooding through my veins for a quick second. In that quick second, I remembered the existence of my EpiPen. I frantically grabbed for the life-saving medication in my pocket, feeling what little air supply I had left in my lungs quickly leaving me. My heart sank as I realized my EpiPen wasn't in my pocket anymore. My vision was starting to blur and had become dotted with a bunch of little stars around the edges. I desperately searched around me in the water as I continued to sink deeper. Finally, my eyes landed on the white, blue, and orange pen. Resisting the immense urge to breathe in, I reached out for the EpiPen. The first swipe, and it was just at the tips of my fingers. The motion, however, made the pen sink farther away from me. Some bubbles came out of my mouth in a grunt of frustration. That wasn't good seeing, as that breath out was about 50% of the oxygen I had left. With all my might, which wasn't much since I was so oxygen deprived, I managed to swim down and grab the EpiPen. By that point, my vision was almost completely black, and my lips tingled something fierce. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. I'd thought to myself as I uncapped the thing and stabbed myself in the leg, praying the medicine would work underwater. After that, all the fight left me and everything went black and numb. Obviously I didn't die, otherwise I wouldn't be here today typing this out for you to read. I awoke in the hospital about 2 months later, where the doctors informed me I was less than a minute away from dying when I was rescued. Thank God my mom had a gut feeling and went outside to check on me. To this day, she tells me, it was just a little too quiet in the house and I had a bad feeling. Mom found my EpiPen floating on the surface of the pool and my body at the bottom. She jumped in and managed to get me back to the surface, where I coughed up most of the water I swallowed, but stayed unconscious. Turns out my brain lost enough oxygen to go into hibernation mode or something, causing my body to enter into a comatose state. It took 2 months for my brain to get its shit together enough for me to handle consciousness. You'd think the worst part about coming back from a coma would be all the therapy that came after it. The physical therapy to learn how to walk again and regain control over my limbs. The speech therapy to learn how to talk again. The actual therapy where I had to express all my feelings towards what happened to me. Yeah, all that bullshit sucked ass, don't get me wrong. To me, though, the worst part was everybody asking me what it was like to be in a coma. I'd constantly been berated by the nurses, doctors, and even my parents about what I remembered during my extended slumber. Which, by the way, wasn't much. It was mostly black nothingness. The only thing I vaguely remember was a dream. There was a garden, big and ethereal, like every plant conceivable to man was planted there and then some. Plants that had never been seen before to the human eye. It could only be described as beautiful. There was also a woman there who was sweet and motherly-like. Her hair was blonde and looked as if her hair had been spun by an orb weaver spider. She wore a long white silk dress, and her essence reminded me of a goddess. The most interesting thing about her were her eyes. It's like they changed color every second, never staying one specific hue. I think we had a conversation, but this all happened so long ago I can't tell you what was said. The dream ended with her kissing my forehead. After that was when I woke up. After coming out of the coma, I knew something was different about me. For one, there were these glistening white numbers that were plastered above everybody else's head. It was also like a new purpose had been given to my life. All these years later, I couldn't tell you what it is. Even that feeling of purpose has seemed to dim, having no possible clue what the numbers could mean. I did the reasonable thing any kid would do. Ask the nearest adult. Hey Dad, what does the number 47 mean? I wrote it on the notepad the hospital staff had given me to write with, since I wasn't able to use my vocal cords correctly yet. My father scrunched his eyes in confusion. What are you going on about, Henry? I scribbled some more. The number above your head, the 47? What does it mean? Are you sure you're feeling all right? He asked, eyeing me up and down suspiciously, like I had just committed a very serious crime. I nodded my head. I felt fine. I just wanted to know what the damn numbers stood for. Instead of answering my question, Dad left the room to track down the nearest doctor. The rest of that afternoon was spent getting a whole bunch of brain scans done, all of which came back normal. I had no growths, tumors, or brain bleeds that would explain why I was seeing numbers above everyone's head. That night I sat in my hospital bed feeling dejected. Nobody could explain to me why I was seeing things nobody else saw. My mother was beside me, rubbing my hand, trying to comfort me. The number 45 glistened above her head. Drowning in self-pity and tired from being poked and prodded all day, I fell asleep. That night I dreamt about the lady in the garden again. She held me in a tight, warm embrace, and then whispered something in my ear. When I woke up the next morning, I felt better, enlightened. Mom, how old are you? I scribbled on the closest napkin after she brought me breakfast. That's an interesting question, dear, she told me. It's a rude question to ask a lady. but I'm 45. It was then that I knew that I could see people's ages. After another month in the hospital, I was finally released and able to go home. What is the first thing you think I did after coming home from the hospital? I told all my friends of my new ability, of course. This, my friends, is when my ability started to ruin my life. Nobody believed me, even when I tried to prove it. No one even thought it was cool that I could supposedly see how old a person was. My friends dumped me and I became known as the freak who lied about everything. The bullying was bad too. Oh God, the bullying. Even my teachers got so annoyed at the insistence of my ability that my parents were called. I got a lecture. The only thing I learned from it was to keep my mouth shut and don't tell anyone that I can see their age. All it would lead to was pain and misery. We eventually moved out of that town, and I got to move schools. It was a fresh start for me, to go to a school where nobody thought I was weird or a liar. Of course, I didn't dare tell anybody about my ability or my past either. I was never the same after all that. I stuck to staying in the shadows. Nobody would notice me if they didn't know I was there after all. To this day, I regret my decision to tell anybody about my curse. High school came and went, and I graduated. High school was enough for me, so I didn't move up to higher education. Instead, I did the only reasonable thing a person in my situation could do: become a bartender. The pay was adequate for the long hours I worked. I got to sleep in on most days, and my boss was chill. His name is Marty, and he owns Marty's, the bar I work at. The place was small and barely up to health code, but I considered it my second home. My first home being the apartment right above the bar that Marty leased to me. My ability made my job a little easier, especially when the state sent in a miner to make sure we were IDing people. I was always at the top of my game. Their spy wouldn't make it 3 feet from the door before I turned them away. When their fake ID didn't check out either, they sulked right out of the bar. Every time a kid came in with their ironclad fake ID, they got turned around. When they protested that they were of age, I told them that the cops could come down here and verify their age for themselves. That usually got them to stop mouthing off and leave. Now tonight was like any other night at Marty's. I'd been in the middle of a small rush around midnight. How it usually was that time of night, slinging drink after drink. I was also alone as usual. Seeing as I was a seasoned bartender, I didn't really need a barback or another bartender, even though the extra help would have been nice. Marty couldn't really afford it though. It was busy enough where I didn't see her slip in. I had turned around to blend a third frozen margarita for Gladys, one of Marty's regulars. I was stuck in a conversation with her about how good it was to still be youthful. Gladys was full of shit. She always went around telling everyone she was only 46. But her true age sat right above her head in big bold numbers saying 59. When I turned back, I noticed the woman sitting there at the end of the bar, as it had become second nature to me. I glanced above her head slightly to see her age. The frozen margarita almost fell out of my hands. The woman had been typing away at her phone so she didn't notice me fumbling. I quickly handed Gladys her margarita before haphazardly trying to recollect myself. "What can I get for you tonight?" I asked her as confidently as I could muster. I rubbed my eyes, pretending to be a little sleepy. In reality, I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was seeing her age correctly. Above the woman's head in stark white letters was the number 300. At first, I thought I misread the number. After all, she looked like she should have been in her early 30s, not 300. But alas, the number 300 was firm where it stood. Her hair was long, wavy, and a dark shade of ebony, as if her hair was the night sky itself. She had glistening brown eyes that had this hunger behind them. She also wore a shade of red lipstick that popped out at you. For her pale complexion, the color looked really good on her. Ever since I'd gained my ability, the only ages I've seen were normal ones, only going up to 3 digits once when I met a World War I veteran. This woman had to be the oldest person I've ever seen. Against my better judgment, I chalked her numbers up to somehow being a fluke. There was no way someone could actually live to 300 years old, right? "I'll have a Bloody Mary," she said with a toothy smile. Something about her perfect white teeth sent shivers down my spine. It irked me. "Anything else I can get for you?" I asked, remembering it was rude to stare, though she seemed to revel in the uneasy look in my eyes. Names are a powerful thing, you know. The woman stated as she rested her chin on the backs of her hands. I could tell she was toying with me. I chuckled as I grabbed a tall, skinny glass and a stalk of celery. Well, my name has no power to it. I'm Henry. It's nice to meet you. I stuck my hand out to her. She smiled and let out a small laugh before taking my hand and shaking it. Harley. Harley. What a fitting name for the woman in front of me. She wore a leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be biker girl. I like you, Henry, Harley said, flipping some of her long hair behind her shoulder. The flirtatious action made a knot form in my stomach. Thank you, I said, forcing myself to smile, handing her drink to her. I took a second to look her over again before starting to tend to the other customers in the bar. I made sure to keep an eye on Harley the whole time, my curiosity getting the better of me. About an hour later, one of the regulars, Jeb, started to hit on Harley. He was 6 beers deep and couldn't tell his ass from a water hose. Come on, sweets. Come back home with the Jeb. I'll treat you right, sugar. We'll have a fun time. He slurred drunkenly as he wrapped a hand holding a bottle of beer around her shoulder. I could see Harley's features contort into an expression of uncomfortableness. All right, Jeb, I started, slinging the towel I was using to clean a glass over my shoulder. I'm cutting you off. Clearly you've had enough to drink tonight. Jeb waved me off and brought his free hand to Harley's boob where he squeezed it gently. A look of shock and fury filled her face. Jeb, I said testingly, grabbing the beer out of his hand. Leave him alone, man. The 18-year-old kid who came in with Jeb shouted from next to the drunkard. The only reason I let him stay at the bar is because he only ordered a can of Coke. Normally, he never caused trouble when him and Jeb came in anyway. Jeb must have been this guy's into college parties since he was only 22. But with a name like Jeb, I'd expected him to be 63. Jeb was getting more handsy, and I could tell Harley was going to snap at any moment. The both of you get out of here now, before I call the cops on you for giving me a fake ID and Jeb for letting you stay in here knowing you were a minor. Like a deer caught in headlights, the kid went, How did you... I cut him off. I don't tolerate harassment of any kind at my bar. Get out now. Jeb's friend grabbed him off of Harley before quickly running out of the bar and into the streets. Harley dusted herself off while staring at the direction the duo ran away in. She then looked back at me and shot me an icy glare. Thanks, but I could have handled that myself. I shrugged in response and went back to cleaning up around the bar. The rush had ended a while ago, and only a few patrons were left. A couple, Gladys and Harley. When I turned back to Harley, I noticed she was gone. In her place was a $5 bill and her drink glass. Not one drop had been sipped from the Bloody Mary. I shrugged the ominous feeling that Harley left behind and went back to my closing duties. I kicked a few drunks out of the bar, called them taxis, and then closed Marty's down for the night. The sound of heels crunching against gravel took my attention off the back door to the bar. A tall shadow stood at the alleyway entrance. I tucked my keys in between my fingers and tightened the grip on the garbage bag in my other hand. Like I said earlier, a familiar voice echoed off the walls in the alley. I can handle myself. Harley stepped into the edge of light coming from a street lamp behind her, wiping something off her face with her sleeve. Blood. Her mouth was covered in blood and she had a crazed look in her eye. Her once white shirt, now a rusted brown color. She smiled at me again. This time 2 huge fangs hung in her mouth. The word vampire flooded my mind as her age started to shine more intently above her head. The woman before me was literally 300 years old. A 300-year-old vampire. She was on me quick, giving me no time to prepare or defend myself. The garbage bag and keys in my hands fell to the ground as I was stuck in her strong grasp. Harley pulled my black polo down and licked the area where my neck and shoulders connected, sending weirdly pleasurable tingles down my spine. I braced myself for the pain that would come from the bite when she eventually stopped licking me. I heard her hiss as a hot stench of iron filled my nostrils. Don't worry, Henry. I'll make it quick. Harley then clamped her jaw shut as she bit down. I screamed out in pain as I imagined all the blood being sucked from my veins, my body withering away into nothing but a husk, and Harley standing over my corpse full and satisfied with my exsanguination. I started crying as my mind flooded with regrets. How much better could my life have been if I never told anyone about my ability? Maybe my parents wouldn't think I was crazy and a disappointment. Maybe I could have gotten a girlfriend, settled down, gotten a nice house and had a kid. In my hysteria, I hadn't noticed there had been no pain at all. Harley had released me. When realization struck, I spun around in confusion. My neck was fine, and not a single blood cell was taken from me. Harley stood behind me, chuckling to herself, as if she should have known better. In the palm of her hand was a sharp fang. It belonged to her, seeing as a nice gap was in place where her upper left canine once rested in her gums. "Ah, fuck!" she yelled out in an angry laugh, stomping her black leather Doc Martens on the ground. Harley looked me in the eye, a deep-seated hatred behind her eyes. "You're a goddamn chosen." I fixed my shirt and pressed myself up against the back door to the bar, still processing the events that just happened. Harley, the 300-year-old vampire standing in front of me, just tried to drain me of my blood. Instead, she ended up breaking one of her fangs and was currently giving me an "if looks could kill" stare. I'm a what now? Never mind that, I screamed. "You're a fucking vampire." In a second, she was back on me, holding my mouth shut. Harley whispered menacingly in my ear, "Christ, shut the hell up. You know, you might be one of the chosen and I might not be able to drink you, but that doesn't mean I still can't kill you." I pushed her off me, less scared of her than I was a second ago. A breathless laugh escaped my mouth as I ran my hand through my short brown hair. "I still don't know what you're talking about." Sure you don't." Harley rolled her eyes and shoved her hand in my face, fang pointed right at my eyeball. "I can't believe I was stupid enough to fall for that nerd's trap. Where is he, huh? How far away is that little twerp, Nate?" "Listen, lady," I said, trying to be menacing, shoving the fang out of my personal space. "You better start talking some sense or I'll knock that other fang right out of your mouth." Harley chuckled. "I'd like to see you try, sweetheart," before stuffing her tooth into the pocket of her leather jacket. She looked unsure of herself, like I might really be able to knock her other tooth out. She took a few steps back and started laughing nervously to herself. Something had her spooked. "Well, this is clearly an act you've got going on here. That or you really are as clueless as you look. Either way, it's been fun, but I'm getting the hell out of here while I still can." Harley threw out a peace sign as she turned to leave and melt back into the shadows, but suddenly stopped in her tracks. She let out a groan of frustration as she clenched her fists. No, shit! I scrunched my eyebrows in confusion. This whole situation was just so odd. Then again, so is a guy who can see how old people are. "Going somewhere, Harley?" An unfamiliar male voice rang out from the entrance of the alleyway. He stepped into the light, holding his hand out in front of him, like he was using the force. What a shame. The party was just getting started. Well, one thing is for sure, Harley was right. This kid was definitely a nerd. He wore tennis shoes, beige khaki pants, and a dark navy blue sweater vest on top of a white dress shirt. He even had big oversized framed glasses to match. Who I'm presuming to be the infamous Nate Harley was going on about earlier was tall, dark, and handsome, but I could definitely tell he was just a teenager. What was weird, though, was that for the first time that wasn't on TV or looking at people through a mirror, I couldn't see his age. There were no numbers above his head. He just looked like a normal guy, who, I'm still presuming to be Nate, said, "Why don't we dance a little?" He then started to flick his wrist around all willy-nilly, as if being a marionette and him the puppet master. Harley then started dancing around foolishly. Clearly, she had no control over her own actions. She hissed out angrily, "Ooh, when I get my hands on you, you're so dead." In shock and awe, I watched as this cool biker chick ungraciously flailed around by the hands of a nerd, no less. Slowly, he was starting to look less and less like a dweeb, as the air of confidence that this kid carried around him made him look almost awesome. All right, that's enough fun for now. Party's over, Nate said as Harley's movement hitched to a stop. He left her right arm in the air, knees twisted in and head down, not unlike a Michael Jackson pose. I hope you rot in hell. Harley cursed as she gained a little control back over her neck muscles and glared at the teen in front of her. She was seething mad. I think I could make out a faint stream of steam coming out of her ears. Nate chuckled as he flicked his wrist one final time. Well, at least you'll be down there right beside me. A sickening crunch filled the crisp night air as all the bones in Harley's neck snapped as her head did a 180. This was followed by the sound of her limp body falling to the gravel floor. Nate brushed the imaginary dust off his hands as he patted himself on the back, triumphantly. I felt my dinner threatening to come back up as I leaned my body against the wall for support. My vision was spinning. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. That was gruesome. Jesus Christ, is she dead? I asked as Nate closed the distance between himself and the corpse on the ground. Harley's eyes were still open and seemed to be piercing my soul. Nate nudged her shoulder, checking for any signs of a reaction. All he got was her body flopping onto its back due to gravity. Nope. As if on cue, Harley's body seemed to liquefy. Nate quickly backed up as if scared to get any Harley on his pristine shoes. The mass beneath her clothes started to bubble and gurgle as it turned into this black, steaming pile of goo. The goo laid claim to the clothes and then started to permeate and seep into the ground. A second later, all evidence of the vampire's existence had all but melted underground. The only thing in its wake, a small black scorch mark. I scrunched my nose in disgust at the scene I was just a witness to. Nate just stood there as if it were an everyday occurrence. That looks pretty dead to me, I exclaimed, struggling to keep the bile in my throat from rising anymore. In the span of 5 minutes, I'd been almost killed by a vampire, met a guy whose age I couldn't see, seen a puppet show, and watched a corpse melt. Don't worry, newbie, she'll come back. They always do. I didn't know how to respond to that. She'll rise again at the spot where she first died and became a vampire, Nate stated matter-of-factly. Great, I replied back, rolling my eyes, because that clears everything up. Hey, listen, man, I heard the tail end of that conversation. Seems to me we've got something in common. You live around here? He asked nonchalantly, as if he hadn't just used the force on one of my previous bar patrons and disposed of the evidence in one fell swoop. I nodded my head behind me, gesturing to Marty's. I sleep upstairs. Nate wiped his hand under his nose as he sniffed in a quick breath of air. Perfect. I could use a drink. Somehow I, Henry West, your average bartender at Marty's, found myself sitting on the edge of a king-sized bed next to a very questionable stain in a seedy motel somewhere in backwoods Maine. Don't ask me how I got here because I'm not so sure myself. There's a good chance, however, my journey began after sharing a drink with Nate. Now, normally I don't condone serving alcohol to minors, but the guy did kinda save my ass from becoming vampire fodder, so it was the least I could do. After a few shots of bourbon and a long conversation, I learned some things. First, Nate's full name was Nathaniel Beckett Wallen, and he was 19 years old. He's been kicking vampire ass for 3 years. Turns out, me and the kid actually have a lot in common. We both had near-death experiences for one. Mine wasn't nearly as bad as his, though. Nathaniel became orphaned when he was 16 after he and his family got into a bad car wreck. Their car had been T-boned by a semi. The driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and lost control of the vehicle. At first, they thought everyone in the car had passed away, but by some miracle, Nate survived. But barely. I got to see the scar on his right arm from when they had to do reconstructive surgery on it after the accident. I'm sure there were more, but I don't think he felt comfortable showing them to me. We were still practically strangers to one another. Nate also had dreamt about the woman in the garden, just like I did. He was able to elaborate more for me, though. The garden had a name. The Garden of Mara. Mara was the lady in the garden, Nate informed me. She was a goddess, And not just any goddess, the goddess of life. She also represents light and good, and apparently when someone dies, their soul gets to rest peacefully in the garden. More importantly, Nate was able to remember their conversation. He didn't really tell me what exactly was said, but what he did tell me was that they talked, she hugged him, and sent him back after kissing him on the forehead. After that, he had the ability to control vampires. Just like how after I almost died, I woke up being able to see people's ages. Mara's chosen few. That's what Nate called us. Now it made sense why Harley called me a chosen earlier. He told me we were handpicked by Mara and given our own unique abilities to stop an immensely evil force. Her brother, Wesson, the god of death, was Mara's complete opposite. Who knew death had such a dorky name, by the way? Basically, he stands for evil and darkness. Before her was him, all alone in the darkness. Mara brought light into his world, gave him a friend. The two were inseparable at first. She was the yang to his yin. Mara even created the garden as their little spot where they could hang together. Then after a while she got bored and created life. Apparently, he got jealous of her creations since she started spending more of her energy on them than on her own brother. He then tried to gain her attention back by destroying the life she had created. Yeah, Wesson sent the meteor that killed all the dinosaurs. Understandably upset, Mara banished Wesson from her garden. Then she created humans in the aftermath of the dinosaurs' extinction and made him live on Earth amongst her new creations. To rub more salt into the wound, Wesson, being the god of death, has to bring human souls back to the garden when they die. Every time he asked Mara to be let back in and every time she denied him, Wesson eventually became fed up and bitter, so he created vampires out of some of the souls that he collected. Their sole purpose was to torment, drain, and kill other humans. His creatures have the primal desire to hurt his dear sister's creations and suck their life force out of them. The goal, just like with the dinosaurs, is to wipe out the human race, just to see his sister suffer. In an effort to combat his plot to destroy her world, Mara selected 3 of her finest humans and turned them into warriors who were meant to fight off the vampire infestation. They were given immunity to vampire bites and had abilities that could stop the bloodsuckers. But since controlling how a person dies wasn't within her territory, Mara couldn't protect her soldiers from death completely. That's why there was such an age gap between me and Nate. There had been others before us, and if they die, then another is chosen to take their place. Finally, Nate revealed the true purpose of our powers. There was one of the chosen who could see the true age of a vampire. They were to alert the one who could control vampires long enough to keep them still, so that the last chosen one could light their asses on fire and kill them for good, since only light can destroy the darkness. And what better source of light than fire? We were destined to be a tag team of sorts. How do you know all this? Is this what Mara told you? I had asked Nate after he finished giving me the basic rundown of our situation. I scratched my chin, confused on why in the 17 years since I got my ability, I hadn't known about any of this. Wouldn't it have made sense for vampires to want to track me down, seeing as I could literally blow their cover? Then again, Harley was none the wiser when she came into the bar, so maybe we smelled like regular schmegular humans to them. More or less, was all he told me. So if there's supposed to be 3 of us? That's what I was going to ask you, Henry. I've been on a mission to eradicate the vampire race for years now, and I finally have a solid lead on where the chosen with the fire ability is. With your ability to pinpoint vamps, and my ability to control them, we'll be able to do a lot of good in this world. We'll be unstoppable once all 3 of Mara's chosen few are united. So, are you with me? Wait, does that mean you were looking for me? Have you been looking for me all this time? I asked frantically. The once dwindling flame of purpose inside me was now a roaring blaze. Had I finally found my people? My purpose? Nate shrugged his shoulders playfully. More or less. Well then, Nate, I stuck my hand out to shake his. We're going on a mission. The loud sound of a rumbling muffler pulling into the motel's parking lot broke me out of my daydream. A second later, Nate opened the door to our room. Get ready, he said, as a brown ball of clothes was thrown at me. After changing into the light brown khaki costume Nate had given me, I slung the small backpack that carried all the belongings I'd taken from Marty's with me over my shoulder. I then stopped and peeked out the open door and took a look at the rust bucket that Nate had pulled up in. "Do we really have to go in that rolling death trap?" I said, pointing to the white kidnapper-looking van in the parking lot. "Isn't that hunk of junk just going to give our position away?" "Precisely the opposite, young blood. That hunk of junk is exactly what they're expecting," Nate said, patting my shoulder as I exited the musty-smelling motel room. "Can you stop talking to me like that? I'm older than you, Nate, like a lot older." I grunted out, annoyed. Nate scoffed. "True, but I have more experience than you." He got me there. "Weren't you ever taught to respect your elders?" I grumbled under my breath. "Yeah, whatever, Gramps," Nate replied back jokingly. I ran out of clever and witty retorts to say as we piled into the van. Giant baby blue words saying devilishly fast delivery were plastered on either side of the windowless van with little devil horns and a tail accompanying the logo. The clothes Nate tossed at me earlier was a Party City delivery driver Halloween costume that Nathan bought. It rode up my crotch uncomfortably as I settled into the passenger seat. He'd gotten me a size too small. We wear the same size, but he said they only had one in our size left. Since he bought the costumes and pretty much set everything up, I got stuck with the smaller costume. A thick folded blue paper landed in my lap, aiding the uncomfortable sensation in my nether regions. I folded it open. It revealed the layout of a large multi-floor structure. "That's the blueprints for the facility. Look it over. Memorize it. Become one with it. Don't make me have to come save your ass while we're in there," Nate said seriously as he peeled out of the parking lot. We had about an hour's drive ahead of us until we got to Marvelous Maddie's mental health institution. That's where the chosen with the fire ability was being kept. Nate says her name is Emily Richardson. All he was able to find out was that she'd been locked up in that mental hospital for 4 years. Nate looked over at me nervously. "Let's go over the plan one more time." I nodded politely. Clearly, Nate was used to working alone. "We're posing as delivery drivers making a routine medical supply drop-off. Once we get inside the facility, our main goal is to find and save Emily." Nate points to an area on the blueprints that has been circled in red marker. "We'll most likely find her here in the activities room. My intel shows this is where she spends most of her time. Why take the gamble when this might not even be who we're looking for?" I asked as I skimmed over the rest of the blueprints. "Well, according to my lead, it seems the place is heavily guarded and monitored, mostly at night. The security on the outside seems to be a bit more lax during the day. It also appears that Emily is the only patient in the facility. If that doesn't scream shady vampires, I don't know what does." "Yeah, that is weird," I replied. "Why would such a big facility only have one patient?" Nate answered, "They don't want anyone knowing whatever the hell it is they're doing to her in there. And by the looks of it, the activities room is in the center of the mental hospital, so we'll have to be extra careful. That room is probably the most guarded." "So, what is your lead for all this?" I asked after a while, trying to make small talk. "An old employee that used to work there. He's human and worked on the day shift. I found his post on an internet forum by chance where he detailed his weird experiences while working there. He said there were only a few people on staff during the day that would take care of one single patient. They kept it dark inside the hospital. There were creepy guards stationed everywhere, and every once in a while, some of his co-workers would go missing. He managed to escape after he saw his friend get dragged away by a creature with very sharp teeth." "A vampire," I whispered under my breath. Nate drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "That's what I'm hoping for. If there's vampires swarming the place, we'll know we hit the jackpot." "I don't get it," I said as I cupped a hand behind my head. "If you can control the vampires and get rid of them for a while, what exactly do you need me for? Sure, I can see their ages and everything, but you've made it this long without my help. I don't think I'll be able to help all that much." Nate sighed, disappointedly. "Henry, I won't be able to do this without you. Your ability, it's more useful than you know. Really? I asked, not quite believing him. I mean, the kid has 3 years of vampire hunting experience under his belt, and I only just found out the truth about my ability. Yes, really, he chuckled. Did you know that the older the vampire, the more powerful they become? I messed with a hangnail on my finger absent-mindedly. No, I don't really know much about them other than what I've seen from movies and stuff. Well, most lore in the media is wrong, I'll tell you that right now. My mind flashed back to Harley's body melting into the ground in a dark goo. A shiver crept up my spine at the memory. Clearly. Anyway, Henry, my point is that if when we get in there and the place is crawling with vamps, your job is to direct me to the oldest ones so I can get rid of them. They're the ones we need to be on the lookout for. If you want to make it out alive, you'll do what I say, yeah? I nodded my head in understanding. Look for the oldest ones. Got it. Nate reached behind him suddenly, causing him to swerve in the road a little bit. A second later, there's a wooden stick in his hand that has been sharpened at the end. He handed it to me. Is this a wooden stake? I asked incredulously. He shrugged his shoulders. I said most of the lore was incorrect, not all of it. One hit to the heart with one of these puppies, and they'll explode into dust. Thanks. What? You didn't think I would send you in there alone without protection, did you? I didn't say anything as I looked my new weapon over, inspecting it. It was a simple weapon, really. It wasn't too heavy and I had a good grip on it with my hands. It was the thought of actually destroying one of these monsters that made me uneasy. I'd never done it before. Harley was going to leave me in that alley, but Nathan was the one that sent her back to her death spot or whatever. Either way, I was in no serious danger then. Nate noticed my look of unease. Hey, he said. We're going to be fine, all right. We're going to rescue Emily and get out of there unscathed. We're the chosen few, remember? Yeah, I said, feeling a little more confident in myself. We're the chosen few. Nate turned down a dirt road that we rode for about 3 miles before the trees on the left side of the road cleared up, revealing a large meadow with a magnificently built mansion right in the middle. It was Greco-Roman style, and reminded me of the White House. The whole property was surrounded by 6-foot-high metal fencing with barbed wire on top. We passed a big sign that read, Marvelous Maddie's Mental Health Institution, in big yellow letters. There was a smiley face graphic on the upper right corner that also looked like a sun. The van slowly skidded to a stop as we reached the gated entrance. There were 2 guards stationed out front on either end of the gate. They held rifles in their hands. They were just regular humans from what I could tell. One guard was 27 years old and the other was 38, respectively. Don't say anything. Act normal, Nate instructed as he started to roll down the driver's side window. State your business, Guard 1 demanded. Nate leaned down the side of the vehicle to hand the man a card. I have no idea what it said on it. Nonchalantly he went, Just here for a routine delivery, sir. The guard looked at the card and scoffed before flicking it to the ground. You're late. Got stuck in traffic, sir. You know how it can be sometimes. Nate had a small smile on his lips. If he was nervous, he didn't look like it. A tense moment of silence passed before Guard 1 nodded to Guard 2. Guard 2 then pulled out some sort of scanning device. All right then, Guard 1 said as he took a step back. We're just going to scan your load to confirm. Whoa, what? As far as I knew, the back of this van was empty and had no boxes. I thought Nate went to go pick it up because he rented it from somebody, not an actual delivery service. Nate shot me a testing glance as he noticed the panicked look in my eye. He shot me a look that said, Don't do anything stupid. I tried to refocus my nervous energy and redirected it towards my hands. I clutched the armrest until my knuckles went white, preparing to be shot to death. A chime sound rang out and Guard 2 walked back into position. His scanner thing was glowing green at the end. Guard 1 slapped the side of the truck twice before saying, You're good to go. Guard 2 pressed a button and the gate slid open for the delivery van to drive through. Relief flooded my body as Nate drove down an even windier road down to the mental hospital. Like I told you, Henry, Nate chuckled. This is exactly what they were expecting. A sudden pit formed in my stomach. I didn't like the implications that were behind that statement. It was then that I realized Nate could be one scary hell of a dude. 2 orderlies waited for us inside the delivery bay when we pulled up. One was a guy and the other a girl. They both wore white scrubs. I quickly slipped my wooden stake on the inside of my khaki jumpsuit when I got a look at their ages. Guy on your left is a vampire. He's 150. I whispered to Nate as we got out of the vehicle. He gave a curt nod to let me know he heard me. Well, he started as opened the back of the van up, revealing several boxes of medical supplies. It's been a long drive for the both of us. Mind showing the way to the bathroom? The girl nodded her head politely as she pointed down a nearby corridor. The restrooms are down that hall. Should be the last door on the left. Nate and I thanked the woman as we briskly made our way deeper into the facility. Why didn't you dust that vamp? I asked. Because he wasn't alone. That woman was there. He answered. What if he kills her? He won't. Nate reassured me. Not if he doesn't want to bring in all those boxes by himself. I nodded and we continued our way past the bathrooms into the activities room. The hospital itself was pretty barren. It was eerily quiet except for the buzzing of the luminescent lights installed in the ceiling. That only added to the creepy ambiance. Nate's lead wasn't lying about them keeping it dark in there. As we got closer to the middle of the building, lights became sparse, and every window we passed was covered with thick black-out curtains. We were definitely in the right place. Every now and then we would encounter a stray bloodsucker or two. I would yell the age of the vampire I saw and then point. Nate would do his thing, and the vampire would melt into the ground, being sent back to the spot they died and became a vampire. If I remembered the blueprints correctly, we should have been down the hall from the activities room. Nate stopped me suddenly, his hand pushing my chest back. Something doesn't feel right. He told me. What do you mean? This all feels too easy. We've only come across a couple of vamps and our prize is right down the hall behind a single door. You're right. I confirmed as a pit started to form in my stomach. This didn't seem right at all. Not if they were guarding the one person that could actually kill a vampire once and for all. Get in the activities room and check on Emily, Nate said as he placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm going to go check things out. Before I could protest, the split up and go along with him. Nate was already halfway back to the corridor entrance we had just come from. I grabbed the stake I had safely tucked away and armed myself with it as I cautiously made my way closer to the closed doors that should lead to the activities room. All I had to do was walk around a corner, and I'd be there. With each step I took, the more this feeling of dread consumed me. Something bad was going to happen, and Nate wouldn't be there to save me. I was about 10 paces away from my destination when, out of nowhere, this older gentleman with salt and peppered hair stepped out from the corner. He looked like a butler as he had a handlebar mustache and was wearing a tailcoat suit and a pair of white pristine gloves on his hands. I took a step back as I saw his age. My eyes went wide as I read the number 750. That meant this guy had to have been alive during the goddamn Crusades. There you are! He smiled menacingly, fangs out and everything. We've been expecting you. Stunned, I launched towards the vampire, my stake at the ready, directing my aim towards his heart. I went in for the kill, but was suddenly thrown back by the man's immense strength. I crashed into a wall where I'm pretty sure I cracked a rib or 3. He was 10 times stronger than Harley was back in the alley. I tried to pick myself up, to continue to fight, but the 750-year-old butler vampire was faster and threw me back onto the ground. I reached for my wooden stake, but she stomped on it and crushed it to pieces. He stomped on my hand too, for good measure. He looked down at me with this fake look of pity on his face. I've always despised you chosen few. You always did fuck with my fun. He snarled in my ear. His hand was firm on my shoulder, keeping me to the ground. It'll be fun to watch you die. You can't bite me. I strained out painfully. He chuckled. Oh, need not to worry, young chosen one. I've got just the remedy for that little problem. Gramps reached behind his tailcoat and pulled something out. A metallic click filled my ears as he cocked a revolver. My stomach did a backflip. Another sinister smile filled his face. Say goodnight. I clutched my eyes closed and prepared for the end. Where was Nate when I needed him, huh? Why'd I have to get stuck with the lame power to see people's ages? All it did in the end was let me know that I was going to die by the hands of a very old, very powerful vampire. I was useless. My existence was useless. This was it. This was the bitter end. Me cowering on the floor as a vampire laughed maniacally as he readied to shoot me to death. "No, this is not the end!" A voice not my own screamed in my mind. Suddenly, an intense electrical feeling coiled through my spine. My body went rigid, then into overdrive, and I managed to stand up. This intense feeling flooded my veins. It was a mixture of energy, anger, and power. A feeling I'd never felt before. It was almost intoxicating. He tried to come at me again, but another jolt of electricity shot through me, and Gramps the vampire was stuck in place. I looked down at my hand, out in front of me, like I was using the Force. "No," he said in disbelief. He tried to make a run for it, but was unable to move from the spot I'd glued him in. Instinctively, I flicked my wrist. With a sickening crunch, every bone in the man's body shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. His deformed body skin shell fell to the well-polished linoleum floors. It's like right as he hit the floor, he started turning to black smoky goo. I barely had time to process what just happened before I was alerted to another's presence. "What the?" another vampire said as he peeked around the same corner Gramps had come from. He looked much younger than the other vampire, with long blonde hair and blue eyes. He gave off surfer dude vibes. My hand flexed out again suddenly, directed at the 400-year-old vampire who just witnessed me kill one of his kind. "Boss, is everything all right?" I heard another vamp say from further down the hall. The vampire in front of me stared at me with scared, wide eyes. "Everything's fine," I whispered, a hastily formed idea filling my mind. "Go back to your post." "Everything's fine," he said back, repeating me. "Go back to your post." "If you say so, boss," the other vampire said as the sound of his retreating footfalls filled the hallway. "This is not the droid you're looking for," I said, quoting Star Wars, as I waved my hand in front of the vampire's face. He blinked lazily before walking back to where he came from. I stood there for a second, my brain trying to wrap itself around everything that just happened in the past 3 minutes. The scorched spot left of the 750-year-old vampire I just kinda killed was something, for sure. But more importantly, if Nate was the only chosen who could control vampires, what in the hell did I just do? "Get it together, Henry," I said to myself, slapping some sense back into me. "Remember the mission. Fight now, think later." I checked my surroundings for more vamps. I quickly pressed myself against the wall as another set of footsteps descended from the end of the adjacent corridor. Sneaking a peek, I found an orderly carrying a metal platter with a small styrofoam cup, some pills, and a sandwich on it. The girl's age read only 20, but I was on edge. She still could have been a fledgling vampire for all I know. Technically, anybody in the double digits could be a vampire. They just aren't super mega old like most I've encountered so far were. I couldn't trust anyone. She looked friendly enough with her long brown hair tied back into 2 French braids and eyes which radiated kindness. She continued walking, staring down the activities room doors absent-mindedly. I could only guess who the pills and food were for. Taking a gamble with what little essence of a plan my brain had cooked up, I revealed myself right as the orderly stopped in front of the double doors that led into the most important room in the building. "Hey there," she stared at me with wide doe eyes, pressing her lips into a small line. Obviously, I'd caught her off guard and startled her. Can I help you, sir?" she stuttered out. "How did you get in here?" I shot her a nervous, toothy smile. "Listen, I'm real sorry to do this. You look like a nice lassie, you really do, but..." I wound my fist back, getting ready to knock her lights out, when I noticed the scared look on her face. A few thoughts crossed my mind. How many punches to the face would it actually take for her to go down? How much pain and damage had to be done before she was knocked unconscious? I was already hesitant to hit the woman in the first place, but it was necessary to my plan. Quickly, I changed my plan to what I thought was a slightly less brutal one. "Hey, what's that over there?" I asked as I pointed behind her. Following my lead, the orderly twisted her head to look at the empty corridor behind her. As much as I didn't want to get violent, especially with a woman, I needed her out of the picture, and her clothes. While she was still turned away from me, I lunged forward and took the tray out of her hand and set it haphazardly on the floor. Then, in her stunned confusion, I grabbed her shoulder and twisted her so her back was to my front, then put her in a chokehold. I felt dirty as I covered her mouth with my hand to keep her screams muffled. She squirmed in my grasp and clawed at my arms, desperately trying to get me off her. Unfortunately for her, I was stronger, and within a minute or two she was out. I didn't put enough pressure on her throat to do too much damage, but she would be out for a little bit and wake up with a sore throat and a nasty-looking bruise. Looking around to make sure the coast was still clear, my eyes landed on the only other door in the hallway. I grabbed the orderly's wrists and quickly dragged her surprisingly heavy body closer to the door. I crossed my fingers and toes, praying that this door to whatever room laid behind it was unlocked. Mara blessed me with some good luck as after a quick jiggle of the doorknob, the door popped open, revealing a small janitorial closet. I gently disrobed the nurse out of her scrubs, not looking at or touching anything because I'm not a perv, and set my delivery driver costume neatly on her torso. If she woke up in there, at least there'd be something for her to change into. I did a quick costume change, then grabbed a broomstick and stuck it under the doorknob after gingerly kicking the orderly's legs inside the closet. The white scrubs the orderlies had to wear must have been unisex or something because they fit surprisingly well. They felt light and breathable, like silk pajamas. My only problem was that I had 2 feet on the other girl, so the pants went up a little past my ankles. Anything, though, was better compared to the tightness of the delivery driver costume. Collecting myself, I swept some hair out of my face and ran my hand through my hair. Hopefully I won't need to do any more evil deeds for the rest of the day. I scooped the metal tray off the ground and walked towards the activities room doors. The small golden plaque mantled above the wooden double doors that read Activities Room only confirmed I was in the right place. I hadn't gotten close enough to the doors before to see that plaque, so it was nice to know I hadn't royally fucked up, and I was actually worthy of being on Nate's team. Now all I had to do was go in there and rescue the last chosen, so our team could go and kick some vampire ass. Taking a deep breath in, I shifted my left hand under the middle of the tray and knocked softly on the door 3 times with my other hand. "Hello?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle whoever was in the room. "Is anyone in there?" I was about to knock again after not hearing anything, but I paused when an even softer voice said from the other side of the door, "Come in." I opened the door and realized why they sent human orderlies in there instead of vampires. The activities room was a huge open space with one wall basically being floor-to-ceiling windows. In contrast to the dark corridor on the other side of the large oak double doors, bright light from the early afternoon sun lit the activities room up like a Christmas tree. There was a brown leather couch set and coffee table in the middle of the room. A large pool table was in the back left corner, adjacent to a ping-pong table in the back right corner. In front of the wall of windows was a large wooden easel and half-painted canvas. Next to it was a plastic foldable table full of art supplies. Paint brushes, colorful tubes of acrylic paint, oil paints, and a watercolor palette were littered all over the surface of the table. A stack of empty canvases of all different shapes and sizes laid in the corner. Next to it was another stack of paintings, all with similar compositions. But they were facing the ceiling, so I didn't get a real good look at them. The canvas itself was full of different vibrant shades of greens, yellows, pinks, and purples. Even though it wasn't finished, I could tell it was a painting of a garden that I'd visited before, the Garden of Mara. It was then that I noticed all the paintings hanging around the room. They were all almost identical, except that put together the canvases showed a greater painting altogether. It was almost a full panorama of the pavilion that sat in the middle of the garden. Emily grabbed an apron with a million paint splatters covering it and tied it around her front. A little name tag reading, "Emily," was pinned to it. Emily picked up a white plastic palette and started to paint again. "You're not Gloria," she said in a slow, monotone voice. I set the tray I was carrying down on the glass coffee table, then went back and locked the doors. I couldn't risk any vampiric interruptions. Gloria is feeling a bit under the weather at the moment, so they sent me. I lied. Something felt off about this whole situation. As I got a better look at Emily, I had a sneaking suspicion why. She wore a light gray sweatsuit under her apron. Her blonde hair was tied back into a messy bun. A million freckles were speckled all over her rosy cheeks and nose. Her eyes were glassy and gray with a far-off look in them. Immediately I could tell she wasn't fully there. I grabbed the pill cup that sat in between the styrofoam cup of water and sandwich on the tray I'd brought in. The cup contained 4 small white round tablets and 1 long light blue pill. None of them had the standard imprint codes that identified what the medicine contained. Just what kind of drugs were they giving her? When I looked back up after concluding my examination of the pills, Emily was standing in front of me, her palm held out to me expectantly. "My pills?" she asked with a raised eyebrow as she stared at the small cup in my hands. My eyes darted between the pills and her glassy gray eyes. "Why don't we try something different today?" I offered her the sandwich and cup of water instead. She shrugged her shoulders, indifferent to the change of routine, and graciously took the water and chugged it. She ignored the sandwich and went back to her easel. "Do you know your name?" I asked after dumping the pills in the sink that was used to wash the paint brushes. I turned the faucet on and watched the drugs dissolve in the water and flow down the drain. Emily said absent-mindedly as she continued to stroke her paintbrush against the canvas. She paused, and then turned to me and pointed at her name tag. "This thing says my name is Emily. Who else would I be, silly?" She then continued to paint the canvas, ignoring my existence as she got in the zone. I took another look at all the paintings around the room. "What are you painting?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It took Emily a minute to formulate an answer, like she was trying to find the right words to say. "Home, I think. I know I felt safe there, warm and loved. I felt at home there. Home. That's an odd way to look at the Garden of Mara. But then again, when I think back to when I visited in my dreams, it could be described similarly to how Emily saw it. It definitely was a safe and comfortable space. No wonder Wesson, the god of death, wanted back in so badly." Emily waved her brush around a large blank spot in the middle of the canvas. "You see right here? This is where Milady will go. I'm not so good at painting people, so I'm going to do her last." After hearing Emily's explanation, the once white blob in the middle of the canvas resembled the outline of a woman. By the outline and with deductive reasoning, I concluded that Emily was talking about the goddess of life, Mara. It seems like she didn't know her name either, since she referred to her as Milady. "You're a good artist," I said, marveling at all the artwork Emily had created. "Your paintings are beautiful." Emily continued stroking her paintbrush along the canvas. Currently, she was touching up a section of pink flowers I couldn't place the name of. Instead of thanking me for the compliment, Emily started airing her grievances to me. "They won't let me paint a mural on the walls and only let me use the canvases. Those only let me create windows. If I could paint my mural, it would be like I was back there." I nodded my head and made a non-committal to show I was listening to her. Emily then pointed to the stack of painted canvases. "Those are my failures, too ugly to even be seen. The only good thing about them is the practice I got. One day though, despite them, I'll paint my perfect mural on the walls. One day, I'll go back home." Even though she was drugged out of her mind, I admired Emily's determination and outlook on life. She had this indescribable aura about her that made me realize why Mara chose her. I could sense it would be even greater if she was at full mental capacity. I asked her one final set of questions before I determined it was high time we got out of there. "Emily, do you remember anything other than the garden? Do you know where you are right now? Why you are here?" She set her paintbrush down and turned to face me again. Emily looked up to the ceiling as she tried to remember. The glossy look in her eyes deepened as she seemed to be looking beyond the ceiling at something incredibly far away. It looked like she was about to cry as she breathed in a pained gasp of air. I need to finish my painting. Emily, I said, as I got off the couch and grabbed her shoulder. She shrugged me off and went into a trance-like state. She wouldn't answer any more of my questions and just continued to paint. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the locked double doors. Emily didn't seem to mind it, but I readied myself for another vampire attack. Another loud bang came from the door. I grabbed one of Emily's spare paintbrushes and broke the wooden tip handle off, making a makeshift wooden stake. If earlier had been a fluke, and I really couldn't control vampires, I didn't want to be empty-handed when facing another fanged bloodsucker. One third and final bang came from the doors before they burst open. I put myself in a fighting stance, bracing for the vampiric army I expected to storm through those doors and rip me to shreds. Instead, a disheveled Nate stood out of breath holding his side. "Nate!" I shouted in relief, throwing the makeshift stake across the room and enveloping him in a tight hug. I thought he might have become Vampire Chow by now. Boy, was I glad to see he was all right. The memories of my previous vampire encounter and the implications that came with it got pushed to the back burner with how excited I was to not be alone again. Still, a feeling of unease coursed through me. Something was telling me to err on the side of caution. I decided not to divulge the new developments of my abilities to Nate. "Oh, hello," Emily said in that same quiet and mousy tone when she first let me in the activities room, addressing Nate. She then went back to painting as if nothing ever happened. He had this complete look of surprise and awe on his face as he looked me dead in the eyes and pushed me off of him. He analyzed the situation and kept looking between Emily, me, and the paintings all over the walls. Nate quickly broke through his shock and looked behind his shoulder. He then closed the double doors he'd kicked open. "Quick, help me push the sectional over here," he ordered as he raced towards the largest and heaviest couch in the room. Following Nate's orders, I grabbed one end of the heavy sectional and helped him carry it to the doors. We pushed it right under the door handle so it would be difficult to open the door from the other end. Just then a bang came from the other side. Then another. "Care to explain?" I said as I grabbed my makeshift stake again and eyed the doors like they were going to explode open any minute. Pissed off a couple of vampires. They followed me here. They probably brought reinforcements as well. A sarcastic, "Great," slipped out of my mouth as I rolled my eyes. "What's with her?" Nate asked, gesturing to Emily. "Drugged to high hell. I doubt she even knows she's a chosen, much less how to use her ability in the state she's in." "Great," Nate said, copying my sarcastic tone from earlier. "Are those paintings of the garden?" "Yes. She thinks it's home," I answered. "It will be home to all of us if we don't do something," Nate shouted. I had an epiphany. We can't take them all, just me and you. We need Emily and her ability to get rid of them for good. If I can somehow get her lucid, then we might have a fighting chance. Nate took a cautious step back from the door and started looking for an alternative escape route. "How do you plan to do that?" I said, thinking out loud as I patted myself down, trying to find something that would do just what I needed it to. My hand landed on my pocket and a crazy idea popped into my head. It was crazy enough it might just work. "With this," I said as I pulled my EpiPen out of my pocket and held it up like it was our saving grace. "Remember when I said I carry it with me in my pocket everywhere I go?" Just as I announced my plan, Nate's eyes landed on the wall of windows. "I don't know, Henry. Don't you think maybe she's been drugged for a reason? Let's just break the window, get to the van, and let her detox on the way back to the motel." "Yes, I do think she was drugged for a reason," I answered, looking at Emily. "That reason is what is going to get us out of here alive." I dismissed Nate's plan and readied the EpiPen. A boost of adrenaline was hopefully just the thing to break Emily out of her drug-induced trance. "Do whatever it is you think will work then," Nate said, annoyed as he punched one of the window panes, trying to break it. "Meanwhile, I'll be over here waiting and ready to save your ass again." When his punch didn't break the glass, Nate tried to kick it. "Hey, what are you doing?" Emily yelled in protest as I took the paintbrush out of her hand and spun her around. My one hand was wrapped around her waist, and the other was at the ready with my EpiPen. "Don't worry, Emily. It'll pinch and sting for a little bit, but then everything will be just fine," I said reassuringly. She looked me deep in the eyes, seemingly understanding what I was telling her, right as I jabbed the EpiPen in her thigh. She didn't even flinch or register that she'd just been stabbed with a tiny needle. I stuck the empty pen cartridge back in my pocket. I waited for something, anything, to happen to Emily. She just stood there, like some kind of zombie statue. A minute passed and her eyes still remained just as cloudy as before. An intense bang came from the window behind us. Nate had picked up a love seat and was currently attempting to use the legs to break the windows. It was a little effective as a small crack in the glass had formed. "A little help here?" Nate grunted in frustration as he threw the chair at the window. "Give me a minute!" I yelled desperately. Emily still had that long, far-off look in her eyes. I looked between her and Nate, who was still assaulting the windows with living room furniture. Another idea popped into my mind. It was a long shot, but it could work. If it didn't, then I'd help Nate finish breaking the window, which now had multiple cracks in its glass. Still holding Emily's waist, I pulled her even closer to mine. Our faces were mere inches apart, and I could feel the air coming out of her nose on my cheek. I looked into her gorgeous gray eyes one more time, before I shut mine and pushed my lips into hers. It was a short and sweet kiss, but at the same time it felt electric. Like a million lightning bolts danced across my skin. I felt a sudden change in her body language as I pulled myself off of her and opened my eyes. The aura she emitted earlier had increased tenfold, and the look on her face was a scary one. Her once glassy eyes were clear as day with heavily dilated pupils. They were somehow a darker, more alive shade of gray than before. Her cheeks were blushed a deep red, and a nasty frown was on her lips. Emily scowled at me. A sudden spark flashed in her eyes as her anger increased, and she slapped me across the face. I took a surprised step back and rubbed my sore cheek. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She turned around and rested her hands on the easel. She looked back at me with a menacing look as she wiped my kiss residue off of her lips with her sleeve. I stepped forward to try and explain myself, but another spark lit in her eyes, and her palms glowed an amazing hue of red. Then suddenly the easel erupted into flames. Emily screamed as she lurched back, accidentally falling into me. She pushed me off of her as she looked at the big flaming easel in the corner. Emily's scream grabbed Nate's attention off the window and over to us. "Holy shit," he said, dropping the chair in his hands. Her halfway completed painting burst and sent hot embers flying throughout the room. One landed on the back of my hand. Instead of an intense burning pain shooting through my skin, I felt nothing. I watched in awe as the ember burned brightly on my hand before eventually dying out and crumbling to ash. Emily looked in awe as I scraped the ash off my hand and whipped the debris off on my white scrubs. "That didn't hurt," I said, amazed. "We're immune to each other's abilities," Nate said as he gestured to a bunch of embers that landed on his own skin and clothes. They all fizzled out and crumbled to ash. Even Emily was immune, but that was a given since she is the one who caused the fire to begin with. Nate looked over at the sectional, which had small flames littered throughout its upholstery, as if to prove his point even more. "What the hell is going on?" She screamed as she looked down at her hands, scared of herself. That glassy look from earlier returned as she seemed to remember something. "Mom? Dad? What did I do?" I grabbed Emily's shoulder and rubbed it gently. This seemed to break her out of her trance, and she looked up at me. "Hey, it's okay. See? We're fine. Let's all calm down and focus on getting out of here." She wiped a tear out of her eye, and a determined look crossed her face as she nodded in agreement. "This window is about to crumble. Just one more hit and we're out of here," Nate yelled as he picked up the same love seat from earlier. "No!" Emily and I shouted at the same time, lunging for Nate, trying to stop him. The one thing you never want to do, especially in a house fire, is open any windows or doors to the room that's on fire. It's called the fire triangle since there are 3 things needed for a raging fire to start: heat, fuel, and oxygen. There was plenty of fuel in the room with the wooden easel, all the canvases, and various wooden brushes and furniture littered throughout the room. The heat from the first fire was already going, If Nate managed to break the window, then the overabundance of oxygen that would flow into the room would tip the scales and cause the fire to burn more, and potentially cause an explosion. Emily and I were too late in our warning, as Nate had already thrown the chair with all his might. First, the sound of cracking glass filled the room. Before the glass shattered completely, Nate braced himself and I grabbed Emily and shielded her in my arms. The sound of hot wind rushing next to me rang in my ears as a loud explosion echoed through the room. Something large crashed into my back, causing a rippling pain throughout my entire body. Emily fell out of my grasp due to the hard impact. The wind got knocked out of me, but I would be fine. I looked up and everything was covered in flames. It was weird standing in the middle of a burning blaze and not dying. I managed to find Emily again, and Nate joined back up with us. Nate let me use him as a crutch, and the three of us left the activities room for the last time. The couch we used to block the door had been blown to smithereens. The vampires that had been piled against the backside of the door didn't stand a chance. As we left, one vampire who had their lower half torn off in the blast scrawled down the hall for help, his organs leaking out and leaving a black blood trail behind him. He reached out for us, hissing and baring his teeth, but he was too weak to do anything. His skin started glowing brightly before he disappeared altogether. He was only 102 years old. Gnarly, Nate said. What was that thing? Emily gulped. I forgot for a second that she was out of the loop. I then remembered the orderly from earlier and raced over to the closet I'd locked her in. I removed the broomstick, and her body fell out when I opened the door. She must have regained consciousness and put the delivery driver outfit on, but passed out again after the explosion. It looked like the force of the blast caused a whole bunch of cleaning supplies to fall off the shelves and onto her. I checked her pulse. She was alive, but barely. I grabbed who I think Emily called Gloria and slung her over my shoulder. Another roar of fire shot out of the activities room door, singing the hair off of Gloria's arm as I just managed to dodge it. Two things became apparent at that moment. One, humans could be affected by Emily's flames. Two, the fire was now spreading out of the activities room and spreading down the corridor to the rest of the hospital. Human? Nate asked, as I hurriedly hobbled back over to the group. I nodded my head. We need to get the other humans here to safety. There's at least another one here somewhere. Nate, do you know where the others are? He nodded his head. When we didn't go back to the van, the vamps figured we were up to no good. They gathered all the humans as hostages in the cafeteria. There were 6 of them, but as far as I know, 2 of them were drained and turned. Wait, they can turn other humans? I asked, bewildered at such a possibility. Vamps, as in vampires? Emily added in incredulously. Yes. Nate answered both of our questions at the same time. Just who the hell are you guys? She asked, looking for answers, trying to make sense of everything. Nate and I shot each other a look before answering her question in unison. We're Mara's chosen few.